Welcome to our Faith Formation night, 7 o'clock. So we're going to go ahead and start. I have with me Deacon John Carew. He's a deacon from our parish here at St. Thomas More. I'm very excited to talk about the issue or the subject of annulments. And, sometimes people think of annulments just as a Catholic divorce or this thing they have to do if they want to get remarried. In the church, and there's so much more to it, and I think we're going to try to unveil the mystery and the depth of what an annulment truly is, really as a ministry of healing, something that I think in most cases where people have to go through this and sometimes revisit the past, but they also find where in their life God can bring healing into that. And so really to explain this process of what it means to have to go through an annulment, do that, the different types that there are, and share some of his examples and stories. We have Deacon John with us. So Deacon John, thank you so much for being with us live. This is really a special guest for us. And this week is special, right? Because Tuesday, you were ordained 8 years ago, right?
Yeah. And I totally forgot.
Well, congratulations, and thank you for your service as a deacon. And so go ahead and get us started.
Okay, so you often hear, where's that in Scripture? Well, we're going to start with Matthew chapter 19, verse 3. And it says, some Pharisees approached him and tested him, saying, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any cause whatever? He said in reply, have you not read from the beginning, the Creator made them male and female? And said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, no human being must separate. They said to him, then why did Moses command the man to give the woman a bill of divorce and dismiss her? He said to them, because of the hardness of your hearts, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so. I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, open parentheses, unless the marriage is unlawful, close parentheses, and marries another, commits adultery. So there's a couple of things going on in this passage. It's always interesting when the Pharisees try to challenge Jesus, and he, of course, outwits them and gets to the root of the question. And it's also, he's quoting back I use this in my marriage preparation classes because it talks about how the two become one flesh. So that's the essence of what happens in the sacrament of matrimony. But for tonight's purposes, we're going to focus on the parentheses. And the parentheses is, unless the marriage is unlawful. And it is from this parentheses that the church has developed and runs the entire annulment process. So from that, we expand to the types of annulments. And I'd use that types of annulments so that we can get into some of the nitty-gritty of what annulments are about. So there's three types of annulments. One's a formal case, one is a lack of form, and the last one is a Pauline privilege. Now, for those who are aware of some of this, there is a fourth annulment format, but it is not used in Galveston, Houston diocese. And that's called a Petrine Privilege, which means the petition goes to Rome.
Oh, wow.
So we don't do any of those. A Pauline privilege, as you would imagine, comes from the Apostle Paul. And it is that if the parties are not baptized at the time of the marriage, then you can submit the paperwork to prove that, and the petition is granted on that basis, that neither one was baptized at the time. And the annulment actually doesn't become effective until the marriage occurs. So it's conditionally granted, subject to a marriage occurring. So the most common forms of annulment are lack of form and the formal case. Again, backing up, the lack of form is used when one of the parties that was in the marriage is Catholic but they didn't get married in the church, or they didn't have a dispensation to not get married in the church. And that's because someone who is baptized Catholic is required to follow the form required of the church in order to be married. What is the form required of the church in order to be married? I think Ryan has already been over this, but repetition is a great teacher. So you have to have the bride, the groom, 2 witnesses, and a priest or deacon in order for the marriage to be valid.
We
If that,
also can I ask you a question? What about the vows themselves? Do they have to be specific to certain words, or can you make your own vows? I mean,
do not
could that
make your
affect?
own vows. The order, the last, was it 2 years ago? The church came out with a specific order of matrimony for different situations. So
Mhm.
2 couples getting married, they're Catholic, there's a mass, there's an order of matrimony.
Okay,
Catholic,
so
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No.
Catholic, non-Catholic have another order of matrimony, and someone who is unbaptized, one of the parties is unbaptized, there's yet another order of matrimony. And as it is in the Roman Missal, as we've heard Father Clark say, you don't deviate from what's in the Roman Missal. You don't deviate from this order
Mhm.
of matrimony. So that
Yeah, so
answers.
I wonder about that, with lack of form, specifically with the vowels. Um, Sometimes I think what happens is when people make their own vows, they don't include everything that's necessary to actually vow your life to someone else, right?
Right.
Which is why they're written a certain way, kind of like the act of contrition kind of ensures both perfect and imperfect contrition that you're totally covered, but the vows written in the missal guarantee that a vow is actually taking place, correct? So if they're in a different ritual and they use different words, or if they make up their own words, they could be lacking like the proper words that they need to actually say, I'm going to be yours forever, right?
Well, there's actually, in the order of matrimony, there are 2 parts.
Hmm.
So the first part is the consent, and
Oh, yeah.
then the vows. And the consent is just as important as the vows themselves. And kind of leads me into the lack of the formal case.
Hmm. Okay.
So the formal case is, as it sounds, a lot more formal than any of the others. It is also very time consuming for the petitioner. And the petitioner, like the first 19 pages is what I call just name, rank, and serial number. Tell me the raw data. Tell me who you are, where you live, phone number, date of marriage, date of divorce, all that kind of raw data information.
So somebody that would need a formal case, this would be someone who where both parties are Catholic, married in the church, te- technically.
Well, no.
Okay.
So the church takes the position that every marriage is presumed valid until proven otherwise. So when the couple comes to me and one of them's Catholic and the other one's not Catholic, but the other one was married before, that marriage with a non-Catholic has to be annulled before the 2 of them can have a Catholic marriage.
Wow.
Because
That's important.
it's very important, because people think, well, you know, the church has nothing to say about my marriage. I'm not Catholic, and therefore, they can't get involved in my marriage and whether or not it was valid. Well, yes, if we're going to marry the couple in the church, we need to make sure that any prior marriages have been annulled. And there are still different ways to deal with these issues, but the annulment is still required, even if the other spouse is not Catholic, and
Hmm.
as long as they were married before, because the church presumes that the marriage is valid until proven otherwise, unless the marriage is unlawful. What does this mean about this unlawful? I'll get back to the petition in a minute. Um, but what it means is, was there a valid covenant bond on the day of the marriage? Was there a valid covenant bond the day of the marriage? We could talk about the difference between contracts and covenants, but a covenant, in its simplest terms, is not written. So did the parties come together so that they could form this covenant? Did they fully have consent? Did they have full knowledge? Had they considered and appreciated what they were entering into? Did they appreciate the permanence of marriage? Did they each disclose to the other everything that the other needed to know in order to make a fully informed consent? Many people listening to this have probably been to the doctor and maybe even had a medical procedure. And they have to sign a consent form. And when that consent form is signed, there's a whole list of things in there that they're telling you about in advance. Well, we don't necessarily have that in a marriage situation. So, for example, one of my first petitions, formal petition cases, the groom failed to disclose that he had an over $300,000 IRS lien before
Whoa.
he got married. Do you think that's something somebody wants to know before they say, yes, I do?
Yeah, absolutely. But,
Yeah.
I I feel like that's a deal breaker prior to saying yes. Kind
Well,
of
exactly. You know,
like,
did somebody give all that they knew about the other? One of the
right.
questions we ask in marriage prep, is there anything that your fiance does not know about you that you think they ought to know?
Yeah. And I kind of have to wonder. So we are looking into new and more effective marriage prep processes. There's one called Witness to Love, which we're going to start using at St. Thomas More soon. And so as we get the ball rolling and off the ground with that, I'm really excited to help us do that, because I really think, and I'm sure you've worked with a lot of engaged couples, but the marriage prep process could be one of the most significant moments in a couple's life.
Mhm.
I know, so I'm engaged now, which is wonderful. Yeah. Anyways, I don't want too excited about that, but where we're doing our marriage prep, they do Witness to Love, and so, which I didn't even know when we started getting into it, but, what was really nice is that we started reading a book together and, starting asking a lot of these questions. Well, then when we did our, questionnaire with Prepare and Enrich, oh my gosh, I was like, yeah, we've talked about this stuff because, we're in our 30s and we, want to get all the big conversations out now, but so many people haven't done that. And I would probably have to think, I don't know, what percentage would you put on it? How many people are in front of you with a wedding ring on one finger, right? Or an engagement ring, right? And they haven't even talked about, how big they want a family, or,
Mhm.
you know, family dynamics. By the time they end up in front of you, what do you think?
Well, I don't know. The ones that have come to me, and we use focus, which is kind of like Prepare and Enrich. The idea being they ask a series of questions and have you discuss this, or do you think your spouse agrees with this? Um, my couples have been up in the 80 percentiles, 80
Oh,
percent.
wonderful.
Yeah, I've been very pleased with them. And then sometimes it means we don't have enough to talk about.
You're good. You're good.
So,
Um,
but sometimes they say the question is, have you discussed with your spouse about fill in the blank? And one of them says yes, and one of them says no. So the one that says yes, I always ask them, who have you been talking to?
yeah. Oh, those were really fun. I remember helping Father Wayne at St. Michael's with his marriage preps, and I really was just listening. And that would happen actually quite often, that one party says, I agree, or yes, we've done this, and the other one's like, no. And then, oh my gosh, we have a conversation to be had,
Yeah.
But that's wonderful, and I think that's good, and I'm glad to hear that you've had a better track, than I have, but in my past, but with others. But yeah, I think that I think that marriage prep process is extraordinarily important, and it really should be at a minimum of 6 months, because you need that much time to really talk through a lot of things beyond. You need time to plan this thing, right? But yeah, I think that personal disclosure, we talk about this in theology about being naked without shame. This is a John Paul II concept. Well, I'm sure he's not the first one to come up with it, but he talks about it a lot in Love and Responsibility and Theology of the Body. And in that, really, you should be able to truly unite your soul with the other person. That's wholly, not with a W, okay? That's with a W. Wholly unite with someone else, right? Because if you're withholding anything, you're not totally giving yourself, right? Which is the point of what we're doing. And I think that's what you find with some of these cases, is that you've got to identify that spot where they did not fully give themselves. So, with the formal, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Back to the range for the formal case. You started to say.
So,
as I said, the first 19 pages are basically what I call name, rank, and serial number. From there on out, that's where the real tough work comes in, because there are pages after pages, single spaced, of questions. They ask questions of the petitioner. They ask the same questions about the respondent. They ask questions about the dating process, the marriage process, the honeymoon, all of these issues. And it's often, for people, it's like ripping a scab off a wound. Mm-hmm. They're having to dig this all back up again, put it down on paper. It's not a pleasant process. And I warn people to be prepared for it being difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, when they're done, it's very healing, because they have taken that which they've been carrying around with them, they put it out on paper, and they in that process they release all of that pain and suffering, and it then does heal again. And it's from that process and from those questions that the tribunal, the church court, will determine whether or not that there was a bond
mm-hmm.
on the day of the marriage. And it is really, it's really incredible to read these things. I've been, the things I've come away with is how we as human beings have not ceased to find out how we can hurt each other.
Right.
Yeah. And the pain that some spouses put the other spouse through is unimaginable. The mental pain, not even physical, but mental anguish and mental pain and mental abuse. But nevertheless, I've had ones where they freely admit and put down on paper that before marriage, they never thought about permanence of marriage. Mm-hmm. They thought, well, if it doesn't work out, we'll just get a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that lack of understanding of the permanence of marriage is the grounds for the nullity to be granted.
And would you include in that, and I think this is always the case, a prenuptial agreement, not the prenuptial form that we have, but what I mean, a prenup.
I know what you mean. The answer is kind of like any lawyer answer. It depends.
Mm-hmm.
A prenuptial agreement that contemplates divorce is not acceptable, but a prenuptial agreement that contemplates how assets might be disposed of in the event of death is a different prenuptial.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
That's and cool. I've experienced that one because the couple was older. They both had their own families and they were getting married. That sort of a prenuptial agreement is a different animal.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
What happens if, so a little back or context here is that when I was in seminary back in 2011, that summer, a buddy of mine had a seminary assignment at the tribunal, and my assignment was pretty slow. So I would go and hang out with him at the tribunal, and his job all summer was to read these annulment cases and do put together what was called like a summary of the facts, or facts of the case. That's what it was.
Mhm.
And I actually ended up doing a few of these. So I ended up writing a few. I just said it, facts of the case. And between my experience of the ones I read and then wrote, and the ones that he did, one thing that was really common was that one spouse saw something they didn't like in the other spouse, and said somewhere in there, I thought I could change him, or I thought marriage would change him, or I thought a kid would change him. Um, has that been your experience, that you've had a lot of people thinking, well, I knew that there was this issue that this guy had or this girl had, and I really thought that marriage would make them more virtuous. Marriage would, is that something you've seen?
Well, not exactly.
Okay.
But it brings up an interesting point, and that is that things that come up after the marriage are not necessarily, and no, I'll say they're generally not grounds for divorce. Whatever
Right.
grounds for nullity, because whatever we're looking at the time of the marriage, the time the covenant bond was put together. So that means those facts and those conditions have to have been existed before they were even walked down the aisle. And
Right.
so in your situation where you're describing somebody who they knew this person was, obsessive compulsive. I don't know. They whatever it is they knew it. If they live under the misconception though that they were going to change them, that element could be grounds for the annulment, because they were thinking they could change them, which is something that marriage prep takes care of.
Yeah.
Definitely make sure that there's no question about are you expecting, there is a question in our assessment, are you expecting marriage to change any major problems that you have? And of course the answer is supposed to be no, because marriage alone doesn't change those problems. And if you say yes, then we have to talk about it.
Yeah. Right.
So we've got to find things that existed before the marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Another example, fidelity that didn't exist before the marriage, and here the person knew about it. This goes into your example. They knew about it, but the infidelity continued after marriage. Again, your example, they thought marriage would change them. But when there's no clear understanding of fidelity in marriage, another grounds for annulments.
Yeah, because there's
there's
basically
basically
things happening. I'm hearing
myself.
Why? Okay, well, sorry, you can go on.
Okay. But you get my point, is that we're looking for the validity of the marriage bond covenant. That's what the parenthesis says. That's what Jesus said in Matthew, unless the marriage is unlawful. So these questions that they have to ask, and it takes pages to write this up. So I always tell people, do the first part, let me review it, and then you can get started on the rest of it. And the rest of it takes some time. And then I review that, and they get to rewrite it in part. And so we never really have a face-to-face verbal about what's on the pages, because I feel it was hard enough to write it down. It's even more difficult that if you have to sit and talk to somebody about it. So I've never done that. I have talked to them about, you need to clarify this answer, you need to clarify that answer, you need to expand on this answer, and fix your typos. And so far, there's been a grounds for nullity in all the cases I've had. I haven't had a lot, but certainly I've had some very interesting ones and a variety of circumstances for nullity.
Yes. So let me do this real quick. Okay. When you okay, well, and one thing I remember from my time in working with the tribunal is honestly most cases get annulled. It's very rare that they don't. Can you speak a little bit to the change in there was a well, I remember Pope Francis did something early on that made the annulment process a little faster. Can you speak to that a little bit?
There's two things that Pope Francis did. One was he directed or asked that they streamline the process. So in Galveston, Houston, one of the ways they streamlined the process is they stopped the automatic appeal to San Antonio. So for the longest time, all of our annulment cases that the Houston Tribunal would grant would automatically be appealed to San Antonio and vice versa, which is one reason why the tribunals were so busy. The other was he asked that the cost be eliminated. So the cost is eliminated. There's no fee charged by Galveston Houston for annulments. I think maybe there might be a request to defer some of the costs, but if you can't afford to pay that, the petition still goes forward. So those are
Yeah, if I recall, I think it's like a close to a $500 fee, which doesn't even actually take over the whole cost of the annulment. It's just what we were asking, and then we decided to give that for free. So I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I have a question. What happens if the ex doesn't respond to questions or doesn't want to be a part of it?
Excellent question. I wanted to go over that because there's a lot of times people do not want to confront their ex. There actually may be safety concerns, but more importantly, there's emotional issues that come up with that. The answer is that the tribunal will contact the respondent, the former spouse,
Okay.
and inform them. And I'll tell you how that information goes about. But they're contacted, they're told it's going on, and they're given the option. You can participate or you cannot participate. Their consent is not required. Their consent of the respondent, the former spouse, is not necessary. This former spouse could say, yeah, they're right about everything, or I disagree with it all, it's a bunch of lies. It doesn't matter what the former spouse says. Right. They are told, they are allowed to participate, and they can ignore it if they want. In the formal petition packet, the last page is called a libellus, and it is a summary of the answers to major sections of the formal petition. I tell people when you're writing that, don't put anything in there that you don't want that former spouse to see. You can put it in the main body, but don't put it in the summary if you think it's going to be something that's going to cause an adverse reaction. It's not necessary. Just give the essence of what the response is. And that's what the person sees. That's what the respondent sees. And as I say, they will be given notice, but whether they respond or don't respond has no effect on the outcome of the petition.
Interesting.
Another point I want to make before I forget.
Go ahead.
And that is, and I've had a couple of phone calls like this where people feel as though they've gotten a divorce and they can no longer come to the sacraments. That's not true. So a divorce alone does not bar someone from the sacraments. It's when someone decides to get married outside the church that this gospel passage applies, and they're no longer admitted to the sacraments. So a lot of, one time I remember telling a lady this, and she cried because she didn't know the answer didn't know that was the answer.
Oh, I think that's really special when you can really help someone get back to their faith, and I really believe that this ministry of going through an annulment annulment ministry is really essential in every parish. I think you need to have one or two or at least three people that can do this because the understanding is just not there of the depth of marriage
That's right.
and I think like especially nowadays, right? Not we, all of us, but I mean, there are so many people, I think, especially the younger generations, that church, spiritual life, the sacraments, is kind of on the side. You know, like you've got the Bible and Jesus, your relationship with Him, if you're even faithful, and then everything else is just kind of over here and is nice. Like we'll go to the church and get married, that'll be nice, right? Um, uh, But with all that baggage, if you want to call it that, is also this tendency to turn towards the population or I think our government, right, and put up more stock into that than what we ought to, right? And I think in a way we kind of make a god out of our government as opposed to our actual God. Um, and I think maybe that's, or, you know, for a lot of people, government is their new religion. You know, they just don't go to church anymore. All they care about is justice and that. So I think for me, I like governments will come and go. And so when somebody gets married in the court, you know, and that's all they do. They just go to the court and they get married, and we don't consider this a canonical marriage, right? There's no, I mean, there's a legal ground for it. And so when then they go through the divorce, they're going through a legal process with the state, but that they've participated now in spiritual realities in a sense, right? And I think that's why even if like two baptized persons were to go get married by the courts, right, they would still go through this annulment process, correct?
That's right.
Right. So yeah, so I think people take it for granted, I guess, that like or you know, that they take marriage for granted, if you will, and they just think, oh well, we'll just get married in the court, it's no big deal. It's like a cell phone contract, we can just get in and out of it, no big deal. But truth is there's something spiritual happening, even though it's not marriage in the church, right? You're still a baptized person, a child of God with a soul. You know,
Let me mention something here, Ryan,
right?
because I don't know the background of our audience. And in other countries, Mexico, Europe, you have to get married civilly first,
Mm-hmm.
and then do the court, then do the church wedding. So I just want to make sure people understand. I know what you're saying by getting married civilly, um, um, but in some countries you have to do that first and then get married in the church. And what happens in those countries, particularly in Latin American countries, they can't afford the church wedding.
Yeah.
So they get married civilly, but they can't afford all the expenses that go with a church wedding.
I've heard this before too, about, I didn't realize that they were required to go, but I've heard that very often is that people just won't pay for the church wedding, but they'll go to the courts and it's easier that way. And then time gets on, they have a kid, and then they, you know, then they really don't have money, you know. And
I've done validations with 7 and 10 people in the church.
yeah.
So, you know, we don't have to have a party just to have a church
Right.
wedding.
No, absolutely. Can you talk about convalidation a little bit?
So many people say they want to come, who have not been married in the church, they want to come have their marriage blessed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of what we would call a convalidation, with validation of the church. But it's not a blessing. It's really the ritual is the order of matrimony.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be the order of matrimony for Catholic couples, or it may be the order of matrimony for somebody who's one party's Catholic and the other is not.
Mm-hmm.
Nevertheless, it's still the order of matrimony. The words that are said are exactly the same, whether you've been married civilly or not. That's what I think is kind of, the word convalidation, I think, is a little
You can say misleading.
Pleading.
uh,
But it doesn't change the fact that when I send in the consents or the dispensations to the bishop, I have to put convalidation at the top of the form.
right, right. Well, at this point, I know we just have a few viewers. If you have any questions, put them in the chat.
So
Of
while I
course,
put them in the chat, I want to mention, Ryan, that we put some stuff up on the church website under the Sacrament of Marriage.
you're right.
There's 3 entries. One is an article about annulments. The other one is a Q&A about annulments. And the last one is a basic annulment information form. So if somebody is interested in pursuing this further, if they can fill out this form and email it to me, we can meet and talk about where we proceed from here. So this form asks questions that let me know what kind of annulment is necessary. And this form only contemplates there may have been no more than 2 marriages. I've got another one that goes to 3 and 4, but for this purpose, I'm just using the one with 2 marriages. And so there's a series of questions. They're not heavy duty. They're really just kind of factual. And it's very simple: yes, no, don't know, and check a box as to which marriage it is. And this gives me the information I know so I can sort into the right category. Is it a lack of form case? Is it a formal petition?
I actually have an interesting question. If you've been previously married, right? And let's say that marriage ends in divorce. Let's say you had a civil marriage, ended in divorce. So you weren't even Catholic, but baptized, right? Get married again without getting any annulment, right? Get married to somebody else outside the church, civilly, somehow or another. That ends in divorce. Now you're on your 3rd marriage, but you're marrying a Catholic who wants to get married in the church. And you say you have to get an annulment for your previous marriages, but if the first marriage was never annulled, is the second marriage even valid? Is it de facto like annulled, right? I mean, or does that make sense?
It makes sense. I'm laughing, and I'll explain why. The answer is that every marriage has to be dealt with.
Okay.
And so, and this is, I got to tell you, this was one element that escaped me, and I'm still not sure exactly how to apply it, because there is a concept of prior bond, which is kind of what you've suggested in your question.
Right.
That is, you could annul the.
You annul the first one, right?
The first one. No.
Yeah.
You annul the second one, and no, you annul the first one. Nope, that's wrong. So I don't understand prior bond. But
okay. I don't remember it either.
You annul the second one based on the fact that they were previously married and didn't get that one annulled, so that was a prior bond.
Oh yeah, there you go.
But when these issues come up, I've always got to call down to the tribunal and ask them, because I never fully understood prior bond, and I still don't, as you can tell.
Yeah, well, that's okay. You and I aren't canon law experts,
Nope.
right? I mean, what our job is as ministers at the church is to work with you so far, right? I mean, so if there's anything outside of our experience and our understanding, like this is a perfect example where we call the diocese, we call the tribunal, right? The tribunal, of course, being a normal tribunal, right? Where law is done for the diocese. We will call them. I call them all the time because there's a lot that I don't know, and this is one of those questions. Again, I don't really remember because I asked. I think I asked it like 10 years ago, and I forgot.
Well, one of my first annulments was, I called it a trifecta, because the petitioner had been married 3 times.
Right.
The first was a lack of form case.
Mm-hmm.
The second one, they got married in the church, and that's an interesting discussion.
Sure.
And the third one was a lack of form case. So we filed our paperwork, and within about 2 to 3 weeks, I got back these grants of nullity. And I thought, they don't do this as fast.
Yeah.
Well, they had granted the two lackiforms like lickety split because of
Right.
the court case. The formal case took the year and a half it takes. In fact, that one was closer to 2 years back in that
Right.
day. So it was the one in the middle was the one that needed the formal case, and it was between two Catholics married in the church. And so, as quick as Ryan's brain is, he's thinking, how did that Catholic wedding occur? They were
Huh?
previously married in annulment. Well, if you don't tell the priest who's prepping you that you were previously married,
Yeah.
no.
Now, I think to be clear, see, when we say a year and a half or 2 years, what that really means is that it enters on a stack of annulment files that have to be read by somebody, right? And it takes that long to get to your case.
Then there's more to it than just the
Right.
reading of the file, because the reading of the file actually occurs rather quickly. And
Right.
within a month or two, they'll send you back a list that says, these are what we're going to consider grounds for nullity. Do you agree?
Hmm.
You have to have witnesses.
Right.
They send out statements to the witnesses. The witnesses have to respond. All that takes time.
Well, that's the interesting thing because that does take a certain amount of time. And I remember when things changed, it almost cut an entire year out because basically, assuming that all that gets done within the first 5 or 6 months, it's then going. In the past, it would be shipped to San Antonio for judicial review, but there were so many going out there that it would take, in some cases, a year for these
That's
things to
right.
be reviewed and come back. And I think that's why, like, I, for one, am very happy and are satisfied with us not having to do that anymore. I think our tribunal is very competent and has enough personnel to review these cases itself, and we don't need to worry about that too
That's
much.
something else that occurred is our diocese has increased the number of tribunal staff.
That's right.
Increased the number of canon law lawyers. There are some canon law lawyers now in the tribunal who are not clergy.
Right. I think Ann Bryant, just to give a shout out, is one of the first female
There's somebody
canon
else there
lawyers.
now too.
Yeah.
But Ryan, did you ever actually witness one of the tribunal cases?
I'm sorry, what?
Did you ever witness one of the tribunal cases?
I know. I never
Okay, so
witnessed one. I just write the facts of the case.
what happens, I've never witnessed this, but this is what they've explained to us when we took the class, is there is actually a court hearing. They go into an office, and of the canon lawyers there, one of them acts as a judge.
Hmm.
One of them acts as what they call the defender of the bond.
Right.
They're going to say this was a valid marriage. There are no grounds for nullity. Do not grant this. And then there is the advocate. The advocate will say there were grounds for nullity, and here they are. Here are the facts that support this, and here are the witness statements that support it. And the judge then makes a ruling. It's not just a read the case and do it. They actually hold a court hearing among these
Wow.
three parties. No one comes. No one sees this, but it is actually what goes on. That's why it's called a tribunal. It is a
Yeah.
court process.
Court. Well, and to me, what's so significant about this is that, to me, it shows that we care so much, right? Like, we care about marriage. We care about the sacred bond of it. Um, uh, well, there I go again. We do care so much that we go through all this effort to make sure that what God has put together, no man can put asunder, right? Like, that is like living scripture out loud, right? Like, here we are, we totally agree. We believe with what God has said in the scripture, what Jesus reaffirms in Matthew 19, as we read at the beginning. And we invest so much into this. And I can't speak on behalf of other denominations, but I can tell you that at least for our church, this is an avenue for healing. And I do know that other denominations have healing groups for people that go through this, and I think that's really wonderful, and they should have that. My concern is how do we make sure that everyone knows, whether they're married in the Catholic Church or not, that like those bonds matter, like those are marriages that count, and even if neither party is baptized, a natural marriage is still extraordinarily valuable and a place where virtue can grow, and I think a lot of people get confused. I was teaching a class on Tuesday, and one of the students was just asking me about why does the Catholic Church require the spouses to be Catholic to get married? And I think that that's a misconception.
Sure is.
Because we have dispensations for what we call a mixed marriage, right? A Catholic and someone else. There's a different dispensation, I think, for a Catholic and a non-baptized Christian. Is this correct?
Yeah, actually the one for a Catholic and a baptized Christian really is permission.
Permission. Okay.
And the other one with a non-baptized is dispensation.
Okay, that
Yeah,
is
I think that's
all
right.
right.
But
Yeah.
there's
So
also other things you could be looking to. You could be asking the bishop permission to be married in a non-sacred space.
right.
That does happen. It takes a little extra work, but it can happen.
Yeah, I've read a case actually where a young girl was getting married in the Catholic Church. Her spouse was Catholic, and she was converting, but her father was a Protestant minister, and it was always her dream to be married by her father. And the diocese, and I guess with the bishop signing off, granted that the Protestant pastor could actually legally marry this couple in the Catholic Church, even though he's not Catholic, the minister himself. I thought that was a really unique case. And I would have to go find that for you later. but the thing is, people don't understand that they think the Catholic Church is so rigid, right? They think like, oh, there's only one way to do this, or their version of Catholicism is basically what their grandmother told them, right? And really, there's more to it. There's the Catholic Church is like a really awesome parent. Like it's a parent that is willing to listen to you. You ask favors, you see what they'll come back with, and you dialogue. But there's got to be a sense of openness, right? And I think for engaged couples or anyone looking to get engaged and married, understanding annulments, you might think, oh, why would I don't plan on getting annulment. No. But like understand what the church is teaching, because we really, we want you to have the best marriage you possibly can. But don't live in the clouds, right? Live on earth. And, when earth happens, this
is something that I explain a lot in my RCIA process, is that the church has a reason why we do the things we do. And if you sit down in a classroom setting and you begin to hear what those reasons are, and it all starts to come together.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had many people tell me how much they understand better and why the church does the things they do, why things are important, why things are done the way they are done. And as you said, and I've been emphasizing, that marriage is a sacrament. It was instituted by Christ. Where does it say that in the Bible? John's first sign in John's gospel, the wedding feast at Cana. Jesus, blessed marriages by his presence at that marriage.
Right.
So, we can go through, why does the church do this? And why does the church do that? And you know what? We may find out that the church doesn't do what some people said.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, what you find out what people think. And of course, I don't want to ruin RCA programs across the world, but I think this idea that people have to become Catholic to get married in the Catholic Church is actually not true. And I think
I've had that conversation more than once. And the answer I got was, that's okay. I want to do it anyway. And that's okay.
That's great.
They need to know that they do not have to convert in order to be married.
Right.
32 years before my wife converted.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
So
beautiful, though.
it happens. It happens.
Yeah.
It happens in God's time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Any
Yeah.
questions? Have we gotten any questions?
Well, we don't have any yet in the chat. So, but I think that if there aren't any last minute thoughts, questions, comments, or concerns that you want to put in the chat, listen, Deacon John, this has been really great. We've had a really great conversation.
I enjoy this ministry so much.
Yeah.
I like being able to help people. And one last point I want to mention, and if it didn't come out, I want to make sure it's emphasized, is this annulment process doesn't look to blame anyone.
Yeah.
It looks for the grounds for why a bond did not occur. That's not a blame approach. That's just a find reasons, find where the bond did not occur.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say that anybody is at fault.
And actually, on that point, I want to add that it doesn't mean that your relationship was not special or important, or the kids that came out of that relationship aren't special or important either. And I think that that's another place where people get hung up on. They say, well, wait, I never had a marriage, it was never special. God never blessed us. It's like, no. All we're saying is, at that moment of where the covenant should have been, it wasn't for this or that reason. It doesn't mean that God can't still have been a part of your life and have inspired you and giving you those children. And, like, I think that's really what a really important thing to understand too, is like annulments aren't devaluing the relationship in that sense, that it's just saying that this covenant didn't take place when it did.
Yeah. And we have to give it a name, and we call it an annulment, which comes from the word nullity, which means we're declaring that it was null and void. But all the reasons you said, it's really looking at that covenant bond on the day of the marriage.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, there aren't any questions here in the chat, which is fine. I'm really glad that we were able to have this conversation. I think it's one that we'll certainly keep obviously on our website and on the YouTube page. And Deacon John, love to have you back on the live stream again. Okay. And we'll come up with some really exciting topics as well, like predestination and double predestination. I don't know what people are into. But anyways, listen. Well, first off, congratulations on 8 years of deacon. That's just super awesome. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your time tonight. So,
thank you for doing this, Ryan. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. God bless.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.